Mr. Chairman, thank you. I actually just more have a statement to make.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you. Well, first, I actually do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing a fine job with committee. I believe that everything has been done with due diligence, and I want to thank everyone for coming here and taking the time out of your lives with patience to be here and share your personal stories with us. It has been a great emotional process for me and for those that I know, even my family back home. When I went home last weekend, I spoke with my grandfather, who is a World War II veteran. Started off as a farmer, young farmer. And the challenging part was, I know that he's ready to go. He's in his mid-90s, and he said it's about time. So I was having a hard time with that, and I said, well, what are your thoughts about this bill that's coming up? It's going to be very heavy, a lot of heavy hearts. And he says, well, my first remembered, excuse me, my first remembered thought is my experience as a young man leaving our farm. And, you know, we're of the First Nations. He said, we've gone back for hundreds of years, thousands of years of this land. And he said, but I was taught to always protect the inheritance of this land. And so I went off to World War II, and I fought for this country. Because he said, it wasn't just for America, but it was for our ancestry, from the lineage that we come from, because we're all God's children, he said. And America is not truly free until we're all free. So he said, granddaughter, when I went off to World War II and I came back, the first thing that I experienced were the businesses that all had signs on their front windows that said, even in our own land, no dogs and no Indians allowed. And that persisted for a while. So that was his first experience and brush with discrimination, other than the name calling prior to. But this man, he is my mentor. And he's done so much in this world that in the end, he said, ultimately, that taught me compassion. I didn't react with hate, but when I saw someone else pushing down on someone else, I stood up for them, because I know what it's like, and so do you. And I've heard this word freedom being thrown around quite a bit throughout this testimony, this hearing, and it's a little frustrating because it's demeaning to me when you misuse that word freedom. It's a sacred term to me, and I would think and hope that others would use it in that sacred manner. And I want to quote my grandfather, because this is what he told me. He said, when freedom means someone in government chooses who is truly free and who isn't, we and all of America are diminished. For the exercise of freedom is dictated rather than protected. If life is a test, the challenge is, can we really love our fellow man? Do we love God enough to follow him with goodwill towards all? And do we love our children enough to give them a world of peace, hope, and understanding? If government doesn't protect and provide for all, it fails. And we all fail the greater test, while some Americans are held down, spurned, and abused with the ugliest weapons of all, which are hate and ignorance. Now, my mentor, my grandfather, I love him to pieces. And when he said this to me, it was very heavy, because it is our responsibility to uphold each and every one of our freedoms. And I want to share that with my committee, my fellow colleagues, because I love each and every one of them. And I think that's good for all of us to think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion on the amended substitute motion. Representative Bateman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My heart has been touched by this hearing. I've gotten to know you. and I know that from this point on, forever, I will be kinder and I will be more compassionate to those who bear a heavy burden. Somewhere in Scripture it says that if we are not kind to the needy and to the lonely and to the afflicted and to those who bear a heavy burden, our prayers will not be answered. And I will be kinder and I will be more compassionate. While I'll support the original motion, I'd like to go on record that I will support a compromise. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative McCrosty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fellow committee members, yesterday, after we concluded 21 hours of testimony on what will arguably be one of the most controversial pieces of legislation during this session, I had 1,000 thoughts run through my head. I think that my vote on this bill is obvious, but I want to effectively express why I support HB 2. This isn't the gay guy casting the gay vote for the gay bill. You need to know that I cast my vote in a thoughtful and deliberative manner, one that is representative of the people of my district, one that represents my constituencies, including students and teachers and parents with whom I have fought for to improve education in Idaho, and one that represents the LGBT community in Idaho. And so I hope you'll indulge me in reading from my notes rather than trying to speak off the cuff and miss something that I think is important for you to hear. I'm not sure how many people here knew that I was gay before we started these hearings. I haven't hidden that fact. It's been out there when I campaigned. My husband even joined me in attending the gala night before the session began, and I introduced him to some of you. But you don't have to know that I'm gay all the time. When we're talking about important issues like addressing, improving education in our state, what you need to know is that I'm a teacher of 12 years with 12 years of experience teaching music to elementary, middle school, and high school students in both urban and rural Idaho. When we're talking about an important issue like updating the Idaho Human Rights Act, that's when you need to know that I'm gay. I understand fighting for equality issues because I deal with it daily. I don't expect Democrats or Republicans to understand the issue with the depth that I bring to the table. One of the things that I learned as I began my coming out process in accepting that I'm gay is that I will process this information faster than those around me. I have to deal with it every day because it's part of my life. My peers only have to deal with it when I'm around. So as I approach dealing with HB 2, and as I listen to opposition testimony, share statements which have at times been offensive and personal, I understand that a lack of information leads to misunderstanding. And I have forgiveness and compassion for those individuals because I know that they just haven't been exposed to someone like me or the other beautiful LGBT persons who have testified over the last 3 days. I want to address a couple of issues that I believe work their way into a misunderstanding of what HB 2 is about. I want to talk about religious freedom, I want to talk about definitions, and I want to talk about equality. I've made it clear through the public testimony that I do not believe that one person or one denomination or one faith has the corner on the market of religious freedom. Your right to express religion freely starts when you wake up each morning, and so does mine. And your right to express your religion freely stops when you infringe upon my right to express my religion. And so does mine. We have competing forces in this argument, and both sides deserve to be treated equally and respectfully. And that is what HB 2 is about. With regard to definitions, we've heard the notion that the terms sexual orientation and gender identity are vague and ill-defined. But we've also used the term discrimination indiscriminately and caused it to be a term, we've caused a term that was once well-defined to now become ill-defined. Which way do we want? Do we want to prove that any word in the English language is subject to numerous, even countless, subjective definitions? As lawmakers, we should know that the law has its own set of definitions. Discrimination has been used in U.S. history, in federal law, in Idaho history, and in Idaho statutes in a particular way. It is codified in the U.S. civil rights laws, and it is codified in the Idaho Human Rights Act. When we as lawmakers discuss how vague definitions are, it should be in the context of the Idaho Constitution, the Idaho Code, and Idaho case law. With that in mind, I can't legally define discrimination, but I feel comfortable that we all know what discrimination is. The legal definition of sexual orientation, as it will be applied in HB 2, as was presented by the Idaho Human Rights Commission, is homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexuality. This bill is about equality, and no one is asking for special rights or for special treatment. Everyone is asking for equal rights and equal treatment under the law. I see my role as a lawmaker as one who makes the law. It's not my job to transform society. I don't need to make everyone like me. If I thought everyone should like me, I would never have run for public office. Everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, period. We have heard the heartbreaking stories about mothers losing their children to suicide because that child was gay or transgender. We've heard heartwarming stories about individuals who did not commit suicide due to the warmth of Idaho public servants, and as a result of that warmth, they committed their lives to positively changing the world around them. We've heard stories that touched our hearts, and our lives will be forever changed from hearing them. As a committee, we would do well to remember these stories as we cast our votes. Fellow committee members, in this committee, I have an equal vote. I have 1/17 of the vote on this panel, and I am treated equally here. And I appreciate that sense of equality. We are a citizen legislature, and in a few months, we will go back to our homes and our local communities. And I work in Boise, and Boise has a non-discrimination ordinance, and there are some protections that are afforded by that to me, some. I live, however, in Garden City, and if I go to a restaurant in Garden City that does not have a non-discrimination ordinance, the possibility does exist that I could be denied service simply because I walk in with my husband. And so I would ask you, as my fellow committee members, I ask you to remember the stories of the people that you've heard from, because they are me. When you go home, you will have all the freedoms that most people have. When I go home, I won't. And if we can get this piece of legislation through our legislature, then I will. I do want to say that if anyone casts a no vote on this bill. I will not take it personally. I know that some people have even campaigned that they would not support Add the Words. And I think it's important for you to honor that promise to your constituents. But I would ask you in the future not to campaign on that any longer. I would ask that if you have a constituent that asks you to oppose adding the words, I would ask you to tell them about me. I would ask you to tell them that you work with a very nice young man, and I hope you say young, who is well-spoken, articulate, intelligent, and he's gay, and there's nothing wrong with him. So I would encourage your support of the amended substitute motion that is on the floor to send House Bill 2 to the floor.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative McCrosty, thank you. You all but went ahead and named me there when you said that someone had made a campaign promise, and that is true. Throughout my discussions on this issue, as I have engaged with the LGBT community, I've let them know that when I was asked in a public forum if I would support Add the Words, I said no. And I believe in this process that your word is your bond. And when you make a promise, that you keep that commitment to your constituents and to the individuals with whom you made that promise to. So today, I will be supporting the original motion. One of the interesting discussions that took place yesterday for me in watching Representative Rubel as she presented the Attorney General's opinion, and watching a couple of other attorneys that I have great respect for as well debate this issue with Representative Rubel. And that's one of the concerns that I have with this particular piece of legislation. Definitions do matter. Words do matter. If you're going to add words, we need to know what those definitions are. The first question that I asked the presenter of this bill was, what is your definition of sexual orientation? To which he would not respond. He did not have an answer. I asked him if there is a place where he would draw the line with respect to sexual orientation. He said no. The ACLU attorney stood up here and said there are a dozen different interpretations that you can use. Lawyers love it when you do not define things, because then it is an avenue through which they can argue either side or for either position. I think in an issue that is as sensitive as this, definitions do matter. I think the people of Idaho, if we're going to add the words or talk about adding the words, they need to know what is sexual orientation and what is gender identity. And Representative McCrosty, I truly appreciate you identifying those for the committee today. But one of the problems that exists is that my interpretation of that could be potentially different. Another turning point for me in this debate, and I've spent a number of hours talking with members of the LGBT community, was I've noticed that there is a tension that exists between someone's rights based on their sexual orientation and gender identity and another's rights based on their sincerely held religious beliefs. I don't believe, as it's written, that House Bill 2 will solve that tension. I truly believe and feel that this bill, as it's written, will further reinforce that tension and not diminish it. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I will be supporting the original motion.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Barbieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee and ladies and gentlemen, there's no question but the testimony here is heartbreaking. I can't deny the compassion that is stirred in me listening to these stories, and I certainly feel no animosity to anyone in the LGBT community. There's no question in my mind that persecution, violence, and abuse against the community, or any community, It needs to stop. Criminal behavior needs to stop. Laws haven't stopped that behavior. A change of the heart, of each heart, has to happen to stop criminal behavior. And to date, throughout mankind, that has not happened. This bill doesn't touch that part of personal behavior. It's important to recognize that each side in this discussion is talking past one another. There's no meeting of the minds possible because each side's values are couched in mutually exclusive terms. My words and explanation of my determination here on this issue will go unheard by many of you because, as I say, my values are couched in a terminology that is discounted by the proponents of this issue. The risk of using this amendment as a sword, which has been shown in many jurisdictions, rather than the shield that it has been designed or expected, is too great. These 4 words take no concern of citizens holding personal religious conscience, genuine personal religious conscience. The high risk of forcing individuals to act in opposition to their own personal values through the threat of examination by whatever institution, whether it's a commission or a court, with an agenda that is contrary to people of faith and people with their own convictions, is evident and should be evident to all. And although a majority of the LGBT community want nothing more than to be left alone, I get that, and be free to live their lives just like everyone else, it's impossible to ignore that there are many, whether in that community or otherwise, that have an agenda in this proposed policy that's dangerous to people of faith. You don't want to be recognized with certain elements of sexual perversity, but you must recognize that in crime there are predators, and those predators will use anything they want to use to continue their behavior. And we're talking about bathrooms and all these other issues that are really of no concern unless you're a predator and can use the loophole to continue your behavior. There are several issues that I have in this legislation, and there's no real reason to try and identify them. Suffice it to say that when we carve out protections to one group, rights are taken from another. It shouldn't need to be that way. Protections for all groups must be included in any legislation, in any legislative solution, and it's not present in this bill. I can't vote for this to send it to the House when I'm against it by principle. If we can work out some language that protects all people of faith and within this community, then I can support that. But it's not in this bill, and I cannot support this bill.
Further discussion on the motion?